Everybody, and welcome back to PoliSync's AI for Social Good webinar series. This is webinar number 4 out of 6. Today, we'll be talking about how you can enhance international negotiation with AI. So quite a unique topic, quite a specific topic, but to be totally honest, today we need diplomacy and conflict resolution more than ever. So today we have some experts talking to you guys about how can we use AI as a tool in these processes. As usual, our webinar series is brought to you not just by PoliSync, but also by our 6 partners. So out of our 6 partners, we have the Institute for Global Negotiation today. And we also have one of our speakers from PoliSync. All of this is brought to you guys by Microsoft Philanthropies. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, this is not the only webinar, right? So this is one webinar out of 6 webinars. So we're almost at the end, but please do join us for our subsequent webinars. We have one coming up next week on AI and humanitarian action. I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of interest there. And we have a last webinar, which answers everybody's questions around how do we use AI to enhance our abilities, rather than replacing our jobs, which is what everybody's worried about. We also have a free resources page where after every webinar, we update it with the wisdom of our speakers and a lot of additional information. So it's constantly being updated. There are tools for you. There are tools for your work. Please scan the QR code to visit that one. And of course, register for our next webinar, or at least our next 2 webinars. That would be fantastic. The QR code is here, but of course, you can go to our website as well. Just a little bit of housekeeping. So Q&A, the more questions, the better, the more interesting the webinar. So please do enter those questions into the Q&A box in Zoom. We're not taking live questions, but as you enter your questions, we do have a team that will answer them to the extent they can. And of course, we'll answer some of the bigger questions at the end of the session. And if you need closed captions, just click on the little CC at the bottom of your screen, but be aware, if you miss anything, all of our recorded webinars available online also involve multilingual subtitles. So you can always go back and miss something if English is not your first language. So today's topic, enhancing international negotiation with AI. So I mentioned, diplomacy, conflict resolution, it's in the news each and every day. And AI, like many areas of work, is reshaping how all of these international negotiations unfold, right? So first, we're going to be starting with a lay of the land of what do we mean by international negotiation. We're going to be looking at the tools that can be used. AI can be used for the process. It can be used to help train the people involved in international negotiations. And as we all know, AI is a really fantastic source of information for all of us. So those killer statistics that you need to drop the mic in the middle of a negotiation, AI can be used for that too. So for today's speakers, you guys, of course, are welcomed by myself, your moderator, who have been here the entire time. So see you next time and welcome back. We also have Dr. Cecilia Cannon, who is our managing director at PoliSync and who has been working in around international negotiations for years. So she's going to define the terms for us and sort of give us the lay of the land of what processes are we talking about exactly, and where can AI serve as a tool to address some of the challenges in those processes, and what are some of the risks around things like misinformation. Then we're going to be going full practical, hands-on with Claude Bruderlein. Claude is an instructor and senior researcher at Frontline Associates. Claude is also somebody who's been boots on the ground in crisis negotiations. So, as rare as we think it is that academia meets practice, Claude is going to be showing you what types of tools can actually be used by negotiators in some of these crisis settings, and what are the downsides of some of those tools. So Claude will introduce us those tools, show us a live demo even, which is the first time in this series. And then we have Mustać, who's joining us again. I'm sure you guys have seen her in some of our earlier sessions. And Thea has devoted a lot of time in training negotiators. So she's the AI governance specialist at Spirit Legal and the head of operations at the Institute for Global Negotiation. But let's all start on the same page. So Cecilia, handing over to you to present to us AI within the context of international negotiation. Over to you, Cecilia.
Thanks very much, Sandra. And I'll share my screen. I have some slides for you. Okay, so nice to see you, everyone. And thanks to everybody who has been joining us along the series, and welcome to everybody who is new. I'm going to be talking through you today. I'm going to be setting the scene of what we're talking about with respect to international negotiations. I'm then going to touch on 3 immediate opportunities that I see from the work that I do in training people to engage in international negotiation processes and to try and advocate in those processes and influence those processes. I'm going to focus on 3 immediate opportunities that we see that can really help us prepare for engaging in international negotiations better. I'm then going to shift the focus to look at international negotiation processes, specifically looking at multilateral processes and the large United Nations style international negotiations to see how AI might be able to help us actually enhance, make more efficient, improve the actual dialogue process within international negotiations. So let me jump straight in. International negotiations. There are many different forms of international negotiations. So between whom? It can be between 2 countries, 2 governments. There can be bilateral negotiations. For example, the image that I've got there between Russia and Ukraine, the peace talks that took place recently. There may be bilateral trade talks, bilateral talks on migration, for example, coming to an agreement on return agreements, etc., for migrants and all of that sort of thing. There can be multilateral negotiations. So, for example, the United Nations climate negotiations, World Trade Organization negotiations, regional level negotiations, such as at the European Union, the African Union, etc. Or you can even have small multilateral groupings of countries negotiating separately. So, for example, the G20 or the G7. In the world of international relations, you might often hear the terms track 1 negotiations, which are usually between government and high-level representatives, and track 2 negotiations, which are often more informal or unofficial dialogues that will include and bring in experts, whether that's academics, scientists, non-governmental organizations, humanitarian actors, civil society, the business community, etc. Then there are many different types of outcomes that we can see come through negotiation processes. So the most, sort of common ones that you would hear talked about would be hard law emerging. So for example, any of the human rights treaties that have been negotiated. Last week, we had the pandemic accord at the World Health Organization, World Health Assembly. And then there's also soft law. So any kinds of negotiations that might lead to recommendations, principles that are not codified in hard law, such as the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, or the Global Compact for Migration, which was negotiated in 2018 at the United Nations. And then there will be other peace talks and many other types of negotiations, issue-specific, etc. So when we talk about international policy processes or international negotiation forums and settings, what exactly are we talking about and what is important to look at? So it's quite different compared to when you're looking at, policy forums, negotiation forums, etc., at country levels, even at regional levels, which are much more predictable and sort of easy to sort of like predict the process, predict the format, the modalities, how you can engage, whether you can engage, all of that sort of thing. At the international level, they are very unpredictable in the sense that you can have one issue. Say, let's take the topic of the policy issue of migration, and there will be many different policy forums at the international level looking at this topic, and many different types of negotiation processes and formats and all of these sorts of things, formal, informal, etc. So you really have to do your homework every single time you want to engage on a policy issue. The processes are going to vary each time. The actors that are involved are going to vary each time. Sometimes it's only going to be open to governments. Sometimes it's going to be much more broadly open to non-state actors, etc. So the formal access, whether you're a non-governmental organization, even if you're a diplomat within a government, mission to the United Nations, or whether you're an academic, etc., you've really got to sort of do your homework each time to see whether you have access to that process formally. If you don't, it doesn't mean you can't do anything. It just means your advocacy strategies, etc., are going to need to be informal as opposed to formally inputting into those processes. One really key thing that I want to highlight before we move on to looking at how AI can enhance our negotiation processes is that policy cycles, or if we think about negotiations broadly, are much more than just negotiating and shaping international agreements. So it's much more than just trying to sort of shape that hard law or that soft law, etc. Real change happens in the implementation phase. So, and even before we sort of come to negotiating on a policy issue, there's that agenda setting phase. So identifying new issues to put on a policy agenda and focusing on agenda setting. Then we might move to negotiation and agreement of standards, etc. But the real change is going to happen in that implementation phase. And there are many different ways that we can implement international agreements at country level, at local levels, etc. And there's a lot of opportunity for influencing and advocating for the different types of policies and programs that are about implementing international agreements. Then importantly, we have monitoring and evaluation and review processes, which should feed back into those implementation processes. So I just want to encourage you during this discussion, not just to focus on trying to advocate to influence an international agreement, but also thinking about that full policy cycle. Just to really show you on the topic of migration, these are all different migration forums at the international level. So whether it's international organizations, whether it's government-led processes like the Global Compact for Migration, whether it's regional processes like the Bali process, Khartoum process, etc. So you've got to really sort of do your homework every single time, because every single international negotiation process is complex and complicated and quite unique. So with that in mind, of these complex international negotiation processes, how can AI help us prepare as advocates, whether we're NGO representatives or whether we're diplomats in government missions to the United Nations and international organizations, whether we're academics, scientists, even the business community, etc. How can AI help us prepare for engaging in these processes? So 3 immediate opportunities that I see and that I encourage participants and students I work with on building policy skills around advocacy in international negotiation processes is that AI can really help us do thorough research on policy processes and really sort of understand the opportunities that I individually have as an actor trying to engage or advocate in a policy process. Even if we have incredibly small teams, tight deadlines, and no funds, which is pretty much the story for most nonprofits and non-governmental organizations trying to advocate in these processes. Second, it can really help us identify, understand, and map stakeholders and really go further than just saying who are the actors involved, but looking at how they're defining issues, what their positions are, how they frame the issues, and then what their proposed solutions are. Third, AI can really help us sharpen our own policy objectives and get narrow so that we can be really specific in what we want to achieve. And also our advocacy positions and messaging and the advocacy strategies for how we can reach our target audience. So let's quickly just dive in here. How can, first of all, AI help us understand policy processes better and faster? What's really important at the international level is to understand the history behind negotiation processes. So I'll give you this example of the Global Compact for Migration that was negotiated by member states at the United Nations, preparatory sessions in 2017, actual negotiations in 2018. This was the first time that the topic of migration had been negotiated at the United Nations in terms of migration broadly, not related to refugees. And this was quite groundbreaking because migration is very much a topic that countries and governments guard with their sovereign right to sort of decide who can enter and stay on their territory. So the fact that governments agreed to actually negotiate this incredibly politically sensitive topic at the United Nations was a huge breakthrough and it was groundbreaking. So it's really important as an advocate, when you actually negotiate, you want to sort of advocate in this process, you've got to understand this history and understand the sensitivities around the topic, that, having such a tough issue negotiated at the United Nations requires a lot of strategic thought with respect to messaging, etc. So AI can just help us much more efficiently get up to speed on what's happening, with the negotiation processes. AI can help us identify, understand, and map stakeholders and their positions. So to give you an example, I did the sort of, I'm a non-AI expert in terms of tech expert, but I'm using AI more and more in my work, and I sort of encourage participants and students to use it as well as a tool, not as like an infallible sort of output generator, but as an assisting a tool that can really assist us in our background research. So I asked Copilot and ChatGPT, I asked them both to analyze the statements that had been submitted for the stock-taking meeting of the Global Compact for Migration negotiation process in December 2017. All the statements you can find, or many of them, online on the official website of the negotiations. I asked them to define the issue of how each stakeholder defines the issue of migration. I asked them their main positions in the negotiations, and I asked which proposed solutions each stakeholder has recommended. It provided a very nice sort of brief table that summarized all of the statements that I uploaded. I just tested 10 to start with. It's not perfect. It doesn't do it perfectly, but it's an incredible time saver that you can use as a starting board when you want to actually analyze stakeholders and their positions, etc. Then it can also help you sharpen your own policy objectives, positions, and advocacy strategies. So advocacy really should be a dialogue. It's about connecting stakeholders, and we really want to be able to sort of come to the best solutions possible between dialogue of different actors. So again, I just carried on. I said, if I was a research-based advocacy NGO advocating for governments and other stakeholders to position and manage migration as an asset, not a security threat or a problem, what sorts of messages could I use to really connect with the different stakeholders? And it broke down the stakeholders into different types of actors and then came up with some messaging suggestions. Again, this is just a starting board, but it can give you ideas and really help us tailor things more closely. I want to very quickly turn over to, and I know my time is up, but I'll just take 1 or 2 minutes more if I may. Really looking at 3 immediate opportunities to enhance the actual processes of international negotiations. So it can help us really enhance dialogue, constructive debate, and connection by analyzing and grouping interventions by topic. It can help us reach and understand each other better, particularly by speaking more languages and cultural adaptation. And then it can also help negotiation processes, or the organizers of negotiations, communicate positive contributions to the world. So very, very briefly, using those same statements that I uploaded to Copilot and ChatGPT, I asked it then to group the statements that I submitted, that were all available online, by topic, and then to put the governments first, followed by the stakeholders. And the idea would be that in these massive international negotiation settings, where you can have, for example, at the UN, 193 governments, as well as all of the other UN agencies, as well as stakeholders, civil society, academics, you could potentially group the statements that all of the different stakeholders are submitting by topic, and rather than having the chronological order of who presses the microphone first, which is currently the case, in most negotiations, which leads to very disjointed discussions and frankly quite boring, sessions that you have to sit through. So this could really help enhance dialogue and help us sort of reach solutions and better solutions by sort of having more meaningful debate and constructive debate, etc. Language and cultural adaptation for better connection. I asked Copilot and ChatGPT how many languages they currently speak fluently. They gave various answers, but over 100 languages is what they said. High fluency of 25 to 30 languages. Currently, there are more than 7,000 languages spoken around the world, and we have 6 official United Nations languages. I have enormous respect for interpreters and translators at the United Nations, and I firmly believe as well that these tools can be used by those translators and interpreters to reach more people with more languages and reach more communities around the world, basically. So it's not about replacing jobs as well. It doesn't need to be. It can be about using these tools to actually speak more languages, reach more people, where we still need language experts to manage that properly, etc. I'll save the final one for afterwards, for the Q&A, because I know I'm over time. But very quickly, I want to say and reiterate that it's really got to be used as a tool. It can't be this thing that we just rely on 100%. As you can see, ChatGPT mentions very clearly under its Ask Anything box, ChatGPT can make mistakes, check important information. Everything that is generated, you've got to have conversations, you've got to go back and check, you've got to really sort of stop and think and put your own thinking into it in order for it to really be useful and to ensure that it doesn't cause harm and actually, like more damage international relations, etc. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. And I look forward to the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Cecilia. It's funny because that advice honestly fits very exactly the type of advice that a negotiator using an AI tool might need to heed. So, Claude, this is a perfect segue into your presentation on what tools can be used in real-time negotiation.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. And Cecilia, I mean, you really laid the ground for this presentation. So I will share my screen here for the to have my PowerPoint presentation. So I'm here to present this initiative called AI Negotiation Challenge, which is precisely driven toward equipping practitioners, negotiators, diplomats with the required tools and experience on how to best use AI in negotiation, and particularly how to mitigate the risk associated to it. So we are a consortium of organizations, academic centers, networks that are devoted to this mission of promoting a fair, effective, and responsible use of AI to enhance negotiation practice. And doing so, we believe that practitioners, participants can become more confident in the use of AI capabilities and be able to develop their skills as a community of practice to bridge social divides. AI, as compared to any other technology we've been dealing in the digital world, is something that has to be handled carefully. We've been used to deal with digital data as a deterministic models that they prove some kind of slice of truth and they may be misconstrued. An AI model is a probabilistic tool. And so it's quite different from everything we've been using so far, and therefore it really needs to be thought through as we approach it. Now, how we do that? We do that by organizing events, okay? Major events. They are 2-day online events. One just finished over the weekend, online event, but also hosted by the Geneva Graduate Institute on precisely, international migration, irregular migration in that case, in the Euro-Mediterranean zone, where teams come and participate. They're being trained, they go through a course, and they're being trained on how to use AI to craft their own model to start with, but also how to use it in the high-stake global negotiation. In March at Harvard University, we work on climate, and I'll be running the demo of that simulation. Here in Geneva, we use it for migration, and there'll be further AI negotiation challenge, because we learned that as a negotiation, we learn by doing. It's learned by using AI models and by reflecting and sharing with others how this can be done in an effective way. And that's why we have important role for experts and coaches, coaching teams of participants who engage in these simulations to better use this technology. At the end of which, participants get a certificate from a respectable academic institution because they became certified user of AI models. To do so, they go through training, as I said, to craft their own AI assistants. We believe that The customization of model is the best way to understand how model works, especially the probabilistic nature of it. So we teach people how to craft their model and how to use it through a recorded session and live sessions, as well as working as a peer group, the peer communities in AI labs where they come and exchange and play with models, in simulations, in tech cafes, and continuously meeting with experts as to enrich their capacity of using these models. Now, ultimately, AI not only help and facilitate the work of negotiators, but also bring a more collaborative aspect to models within teams where people can work and exchange about an AI output, but also across teams, across delegations. AI has been hard-coded to solve problems, solve complex issues, and with the support of AI, it augments the capacity of negotiating teams and delegation to work in a more collaborative manner, and therefore to be also more effective as human-to-human negotiators. It sorts data, as Cecilia mentioned, but it also recommends tactical steps and can run even simulation, as we will just do in a second, okay? But it is an art and it is a skill. How we model the use of AI assistant using a GPT requires different steps in terms of instruction, prompts, and uploads, as well as understanding that an output of a model is only the beginning of a dialogue. Okay, what a model will give you is only the start. You never take the output of a model at any stages as being the final authoritative statement. Again, AI models are probabilistic. It's only through engagement and experience and expanding the capacity of the model through your dialogue that you will get a more nuanced and effective answer. So what we're going to do here, we're going to do a short demo. We're using an AI model that was used at Harvard University for a simulation. The simulation was a 2-day event where we predicted how a negotiation at the COP30 will take place in Belém, focusing on one particular issue, was transitioning away from fossil fuel. The problem we have with these large conferences like the COP is that you have over 100,000 participants. You have hundreds of delegations from states, organizations, civil society, lobby groups, and delegations coming to the COP are overwhelmed by the complexity of number of tracks, over 100 tracks of negotiations and working groups, of issues and stakeholders. As I said, delegation take, I don't know, Mali delegation or Kyrgyzstan or delegation from the least developed countries often come to these conferences, and the conference has not started. They are overwhelmed by the complexity, by the amount of data being produced by these conferences. So although we call them universal and inclusive, but in reality, when a delegation like Brazil has 1,600 delegates, or Canada over 800 delegates, Mali has 12. Kyrgyzstan has 3. So you can imagine the imbalance and to what point AI could really be a good, a game changer for many of these delegations, I would say the majority of the delegations. So we are testing these models using teams of practitioners and graduate students to see how we can improve the models in terms of crafting and design, but more important, how people are using the model, so as a user experience. So what I'll do here, I'm gonna go on the model that was used at Harvard in March, and we're gonna be testing it to see how it operates. Okay, so this is the standard model that was crafted by participants to the AI negotiation challenge at Harvard, this 2-day simulation. And in the back of the model, I quickly show, if you go to edit my GPT, you will have the backend, which has a number of instructions mentioned here, as well as upload of information that are the information that participants will continuously upload to their model as they navigate the negotiation. And as they are being trained, they will be guided toward how to best use the model, any model, but in this particular one, to say, for example, we will negotiate here. We are Tuvalu, and we're preparing a meeting with the Chinese delegation. Okay, that's the case I would like to present here. But to do so, we first need to thicken the plot to make sure the model has the latest information planning for this simulation. So I will ask, what is the latest situation of Tuvalu in terms of climate transformation and how it should engage with China? So here, the point here is to get the model to warm up, as we say, to insert into the chat a warming up of the data to make sure that the model has access to information it has already in its database, but talking about national survival and preservation of territorial integrity, and moving on to thicken this aspect here. But as we do so, this is where we start to say as well, I will put it here already. Please do check over the internet if there are latest information we should be aware of. And that's an important point. Let me just go here. There we go. And that's an important point. Your AI model is not isolated from the internet. Although it is a probabilistic model, you can go seek over to the internet and draw from the internet the latest news that can be of relevance for your analysis. Okay, so you do not use the model in isolation from what is on the internet. You can update your chat and connect it to the latest event. And this is where, especially in a COP conference, where you have data emerging of the COP discussion, but you have a lot of data surrounding in the media, publication of reports which are not issued by the conference, but emerge all over the world during this situation. And ultimately, when you have all this data, you can ask the model to start putting together, for example, an island of agreement, which is a table of 4 columns to determine the point of departure of the dialogue between Tuvalu and the Chinese delegation. Now, you note it reads 2 values, but actually it doesn't care. You'll see the model recognize that actually I meant Tuvalu as a country. Okay, so then it says the Tuvalu, fortunately, it recognized it. And then it will simply build a table in a pre-coded template that you have insisting on contested fact, agreed facts, convergent norm, and divergent norms. And that allows you, again, as an initial point of departure in a discussion with your colleagues on how to orient the beginning of the dialogue at a specific meeting. In a writing format, you want to write a letter to the delegation or whatever the type of output you want to produce. I will stop sharing here to conclude here, okay, that AI is an extremely powerful tool. It generates language, and in diplomacy, language is everything. But it remains a probabilistic model. It's extremely important people understand the limitation and the risk associated to probabilistic model, especially in terms of biases, in terms of language being used. If you have a conversation in English with your model, or you have it in French or in Chinese, the answer will be entirely different because it looks into language, which is not the same framework of reference. So understanding language in terms of diplomacy, culture, society is a critical component of using AI. A minimum of agility on how you prompt the model, how you customize it, is as critical of having a driver license. Okay, if you go in a car, of course you can move the car around, but you risk serious damage and injury if you're not being trained of how to do it in an effective manner. And ultimately, it's a collective experience. The point here is not that you simply take the model AI and it's facilitate and augment your capacity. It's a collaborative effort. So we can conduct more collaborative negotiation. That will take time because when Mali or Kyrgyzstan will have AI model, certainly they won't be the first one at the next COP. So we need to see and understand how we can build the capacity of delegation, of immersing and emerging as solid, robust AI users, so we can find this new collaborative environment in the future COP or any other multilateral meeting. So I'll stop here.
Thanks a lot, Claude. That's a perfect segue into what Thea is going to talk to us about, which is upskilling. I think you said it right in that it's not just a tool, it's actually a skill, and you can do good or you can do damage depending on how well you know how to use it. Over to you, Thea.
Yeah, I was about to make the comment that well, it's so easy when the stage is so well set for you to kind of just like wrap things up and put a nice little bow and then scream about the risks a little bit more. But yeah, I'm the lawyer in the room. I have to scream about risks. That's what I'm paid to do. Anyways, enhancing negotiation with AI. Why did I put enhancing negotiation? Well, I do work in the private sector, and we are here to talk about international negotiation, but I would like to stress that this applies to basically all negotiation situations, which basically includes every single day and every single moment of your life, be it with your family or partners, and then taking it up to the global scales and the very important negotiations where these little differences in the language can mean even more. So what role does AI potentially play in negotiations? Well, Cecilia has mentioned a few of these things. So supporting these are just some of the things that came from the top of my mind. Supporting treaty language development, cultural and linguistic adaptations, both in real time and post hoc, scenario modeling and outcome forecasting, creating tailored briefing material, analyzing and comparing negotiation positions. When I say supporting treaty language development, as well as cultural and linguistic adaptation in real time, I will not be talking too much about these two, or rather at all, but I would like to stress two things. Supporting treaty language development. Why supporting? Because I'm a big opponent of using AI to draft first initial drafts of these things. Then the AI has the power to, frame what the issue is. In most cases, you do not want that, especially in political negotiations, which tend to be very sensitive. And you should not imply or think that AI understands all these political nuance. Supporting treaty language development, finding that right word that will make everyone happy, that's a different thing. That AI can do great. Cultural and linguistic adaptation in real time, big fan, especially for translating within the same language. The amount of emails I make pretty and when I want to sound less annoyed and more friendly using AI, great for that. And also great for supporting you in languages which you do speak. When it comes to languages that you don't speak, I would be very careful. So I have my own custom GPTs for French, German, and English. I do not have one for Chinese for obvious reasons. I don't speak Chinese. So I'm very unwilling to give AI full control over what I say or don't say in Chinese. For that, I would still stick to professional interpreters. But for languages which you do understand and you just need that little bit of help, AI can be a great tool. But then let's focus on these three. So scenario modeling and outcome forecasting, analyzing and comparing negotiation positions, creating tailored briefing materials. Comparing negotiation positions, exactly how Cecilia described it, great use case for AI. I don't think I need to add much further. Analyzing a whole bunch of documents in very short amounts of time, especially if you're kind of familiar with the subject matter, great tool. Scenario modeling and outcome forecasting, well, sometimes you need to think about possible outcomes and you will never, not all of the possible outcomes will come to you. AI can be a great brainstorming partner, and then creating tailored briefing material, which kind of comes in between these two, but also Claude's use case, basically. So again, storming through mountains of material to get a briefing in a very short amount of time, especially for situations where you do not have a lot of time for prep, AI can be a great partner. In all these use cases, you can rely on AI as a teacher, a counterpart, a team member, or a mediator. When I say a teacher, I mean exactly that. So you can use AI to teach you strategies, to show you better ways forward, to brainstorm with you how to deal something. As a team member, it can help you prep, it can do your briefings, it can give you alternative arguments, etc. As a counterpart, you can use AI to basically bulletproof your own arguments. So you can argue with the AI to kind of strongman yourself into making even better arguments. And then you can also use it as a mediator because, well, not all AIs are perfect. Well, none of the AIs are perfect, but humans are also not perfect. So if it's biased one side or the other, well, it will still give you kind of like a safe space to practice a bit. And exactly that you can do in this wonderful MIT simulation where you can negotiate with Obama or Trump as to how to divide a dollar. I would invite you all to scan this and then keep it for later, keep the web page open for later, just so that we don't use a lot of time on this, but it is a great exercise, and if you have any comments and want to share them with me later, I am more than open to hearing them. I've personally negotiated with Trump using this app, and it's a fun little experience. But I did say that I'm going to scream about the risks for a bit. So Gen AI and negotiations, what could possibly go wrong? A lot of things could go wrong. Not all are AI related. So a lot of things could go wrong just because of the way that negotiations work. If you use AI as an adversary, you can either overestimate it or underestimate it just as any other adversary. If you use it as a partner, you can over-rely on your partner, or you can leave your partner outside of the room, meaning not use it at all, which is kind of what some of the people have been doing in the AI space just because they are kind of afraid and don't know what they can or cannot use it for. But also one important AI-related thing is that you can assume that AI knows the stakes. It doesn't, especially when it comes to these high-level political negotiations. Yeah, they do not care as much as you do, and you should keep that in mind. As a teacher, you can blindly follow it, which kind of ties into the last point, treating AI as a strategy, not a tool. So, taking everything that it gives you as a given. But you can also think that you're always smarter than the teacher. For some things, AI can be pretty smart. And then as a mediator, you can focus on the wrong details, spending too much time explaining uninteresting or unimportant things. And you can also skip over the crucial points because you wasted too much time on the unimportant things. But you can also assume that AI is always neutral. As I said, humans have biases, but so does AI. So do not assume that it will always come to the ultimately correct response. And this all applies for whichever use case you use, whether it be for preparation or in real-time negotiation. You should always avoid these, not just with AI, also with your human negotiating partners. But then we also have the AI-specific wildcards, right? So one, AI can hallucinate with astonishing confidence, and just because it talks well doesn't mean it negotiates well. We have seen this in a couple of cases that have ended in the news because they are, well, as interesting and disturbing as they are. So we had a DPD chatbot which started swearing at one of the customers. We had a Air Canada airline chatbot which promised certain discounts which did not exist. Fast forward to time present, Air Canada still had to provide the discounts because their chatbot promised them. Be careful. And then we had the Chevrolet chatbot, which sold a Chevy Tahoe for $1. In that particular case, the person who negotiated with it was just trying to make a point, and they did not demand their Chevy Tahoe for $1. But given the outcome of the Air Canada case, they would have presumably gotten it. So just because they talk well doesn't mean they're the smartest in the room, and doesn't mean that they're always 100% right. So be careful. Second thing, treating ethics as an afterthought. I already spoke briefly about biases. Biases are they're an integral part of these things. Why? Because they were trained on data, and our historic data has biases. This is just the way that things work currently. This is not that way by design. Nobody meant it to be that way, but it's a difficult problem, and it's a difficult problem that cannot be easily solved, which is what you can see on the left side of the screen, where you can see what happens when you do try to manually solve the problem. So this was in the newspaper when Google Gemini started creating German soldiers in 1934 and US senators in 1800s, featuring, well, very diverse Nazis and very diverse US senators in the 19th century, which of course was not the case, and it does not represent the historic facts. But they try to manually program diversity into the system, which of course then means that the system is no longer accurate. So you should be careful when using these things. You should be mindful of your own biases and also of the historic biases, so that you do not, again, blindly rely on these things being accurate. And then one final thing, well, two final things, both relating to treating law as an afterthought. That's how you end up in the news. So not just the bad negotiation tactics and treating ethics as an afterthought, but also treating law as an afterthought. Generative AI was trained using a whole lot of copyright protected material. This is subject to ongoing legal procedures, and it is something that you should be mindful of if using these tools. So double check everything that it is not protected. The same applies for personal data. If you're using any of the freely available tools, odds are your data is going to end up in it, and so will any data that you type from any other person into the chat. If you use the paid version, you can opt out of this use, and you should definitely do that. One final law-related thing and one final thing in general, transparency. You should always be transparent if you used AI, how you used it. And if you can't say it out loud, well, you probably should not be doing it in the first place. This might be slightly more difficult in complicated geopolitical negotiations, but still publicly saying that you use AI and what you use it for and how you use it for does create a certain sense of trust, and I would not underestimate the importance of this sense of trust, especially in sensitive negotiations. And that wraps it up. I heard the signal for the end of my time a few minutes ago, so I hope I didn't overstep it too much.
No worries. That was super useful. I don't think it's just me, but to quote the Chevy chatbot who said no takesies backsies, I thought that was pretty interesting. But as in global negotiations, there's no takesies backsies, right?
No.
So
You have to be very careful what you promise.
exactly. And, tech is developing so quickly that some of these issues can snowball. Like you said, you can't reduce the bias later. The bias is only going to entrench itself, if you don't fix it quickly. So we are now in our panel discussion. I saw some questions coming in through the chat, but to sort of like pick up on the tail end of where you left off, Taya, you talked a little bit about copyright. I know everybody has sort of like alluded to misinformation, AI hallucinations, etc. So Cecilia, I have a question for you. And I think, because you're also PoliSync, it would be a great way to link one of our past webinars to what we're talking about now. So our webinar number 2 was about misinformation and disinformation. Can you tell us a little bit more, Cecilia, about where is the intersection sort of these concerns around misinformation and disinformation generated by AI and risks that are sort of like inherent to an international negotiation process? How does that play out when those two things collide?
Thanks, Sandra. Yeah, so I mean, I might even broaden it a little bit to sort of touch on that third topic that I didn't have time to speak about, which is the importance of communications and how AI can help international organizations like the United Nations, like specific UN bodies, etc., communicate better to the world what they're actually doing. And a lot of the the positive work, the contributions that they are making to our world and our society, which really very much ties to the topic of misinformation and disinformation, because if we look traditionally at how communications is kind of dealt with, it has been this whole world of international relations, multilateralism, etc. That has been criticized, and perhaps for good reason, for often operating in a bit of a bubble. So everybody in the bubble knows what's going on, has a lot to sort of say to one another, is across all of the thousands and thousands of acronyms that are used that I still struggle with, after 18 years here in Geneva. But it's very much, like experts in this world talking to one another. And when we hear about, the United Nations, when we hear about certain UN bodies like the UN Refugee Agency or this NGO, even international non-governmental organizations, etc., we hear about it in the news and it's often negative. So it's often what we hear is like crises that are happening and all of these sorts of things. But one really important thing to sort of keep in mind is that disinformation, so deliberate, incorrect information, is really sort of spreading at rapid paces about this whole international relations sector. So to give you an example, the Global Compact for Migration negotiations that I was talking about, the preparatory sessions took place across 12 months in 2017, where they brought in a whole range of stakeholders, scholars, experts, scientists, the business community, humanitarian actors, etc. So it was a really kind of like evidence-based process where all of these different stakeholders were engaged. It was very much government driven. So member state led the negotiations, directed the negotiations, etc., and the whole process, and decided what was in that final output. There was a really, really strong and targeted and highly sophisticated disinformation campaign that was launched by far-right groups between the time that this negotiation text was finalized in July of 2018 and the December 2018 when the actual Global Compact was adopted. So during that sort of 5-6 month period, there was really targeted and sophisticated online using social media, using videos, etc., that were really spreading information that was just completely unfounded and incorrect. And there have been studies done on this now, also linking it back to who was really behind the groups that were behind it. But it really actually had tangible impacts on a number of countries then walked away from the Global Compact for Migration. They didn't actually adopt it in December. Some of them didn't even go and participate in the actual Marrakesh meeting to adopt it, etc. So all of that to sort of say that we really need to, or we can use AI because it can be a very cost-effective way for helping us with our communication strategies, crafting messages, getting the positive messages about what's actually happening here, so that it can first and foremost counter the disinformation that's out there, but also just sort of build more support throughout local communities with different local stakeholders, etc., for all of the good things that are happening. And there are still enormous good things, and we need it, more than ever today in our troubled times, etc. One very quick thing I want to add, and then I'll stop. The issue of copyright I find really interesting, and I kind of find myself debating on both sides of in my own heads on this topic, and I'd love to hear Taya and Claude's thoughts on this as well, and Sandra, yours. But we heard from Mari McAuliffe in our 2 webinars ago on misinformation, combating misinformation and disinformation with AI. So she was talking about, how at IOM Research, they very deliberately make their research outputs, so in particular the World Migration Report, that they publish every 2 years. They make sure that it's in HTML format so that AI platforms, that the large language models can easily take the information and use it to sort of make sure that their outputs on migration are generated using data that is evidence-based, etc. And I've heard other people, really have the opposite argument of no, like we can't just give all of these AI platforms, LLM, the large language models, etc., all of this information for free because they're not public goods. They're not, public libraries. They're not, whatever it is. And they can change hands. We don't know whose hands they're going to be in, etc. And I'm kind of like torn between the two, and I see, sort of positive things on both sides of the arguments, etc. So I'd love to hear the other thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, that's similar to the next question that I had for Claude, actually, which is, Claude, you alluded a few times to the fact that AI is based on a probabilistic model and that there are shortcomings in terms of how you can use it. We shouldn't expect it to be useful all the time in every situation. And in some situations, that probabilistic model can be problematic, from what I understood from you. So, do you want to tell us a little bit more about, where does AI fall short when it comes to international negotiation? And what's the solution? Is the solution actually technology, or is it the human side of the process?
Thank you very much. Well, what probabilistic models are good at is probability, finding what's the most likely answer, options, follow-up tactics that someone would like to use with some foresight based on the data set. And conversely, what it's not good at, any form of truth, any form of facts, okay? And that depends, as you say, on the user, how the user asks the question and what is expected out of the model. If you ask, for example, 2 + 2 to an AI model, and you expect the model to calculate 2 + 2 is 1, 2, 3, 4, you're totally wrong. The model is not a calculator. The model will simply look into its data set of what follows 2 + 2 and will end up with a high probability of the sign equal and the number 4, and it will give you 2 + 2 = 4, and you think, oh, this is a brilliant model because it knows how to calculate, where in fact it doesn't. It simply amalgamate patterns of the most probable pattern that will follow. But if you would have a malicious party who simply upload the internet with 2 + 2 and a picture of, I don't know, a horse, okay, millions of times, well, if you ask a model 2 + 2, you would get a picture of a horse, So the point here is that probabilistic models are as good as the user is to understand what probability is all about, okay? So in negotiation, it can be extremely useful because it looks into probabilities of outputs. What tactics you may use, what are the possibilities your Chinese delegation or UNHCR will take a certain stand based on the data sets of the documents and other policy it has. It's extremely powerful, but do not ask what happened in Cox's Bazar in June 1998, because it won't, unless it jump over the internet and then find out that deterministic fact, So it's a critical point here that to leverage an AI model, you need to understand probabilistic mechanics, and you need to be trained, because ultimately it's an issue on how you prompt the model. So our recommendation is follow a course. Of course, you can dab on GPT, but as long as you're not really trained and shared and belong to some kind of a peer group that help you how to drive this new car, you're running into difficulties and risk by mishandling the technology.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And honestly, I feel like we're coming to the same conclusion at the end of every webinar, which is that human agency, upskilling, and your capacity to understand how these models work, and more importantly, how to use them, is really the name of the game. We're not exactly on time, but just because we have a pause between questions, I want to flag this with the audience. So our dear audience, we'll be going shortly into audience Q&A, but we will continue after the session is over. So quickly, for those who have to leave at the top of the hour, reminding you that we have 2 more webinars to go. Please do sign up, one on humanitarian action, next one coming up, and the last one really all about this question of human creativity and agency in the age of AI. And we, of course, have our resources page, which we encourage you to go to. A link to Claude's tool, hopefully we can include on the resources page. I think it's particularly interesting to look at purpose-built tools for these types of exercises. So please do have a look at those. But for now, if you do have the time, stick around, because we're going to dive into some of your key questions over here. So, Thea, I have a quick question around sort of this human agency piece, but I'm linking it to what you were saying during your presentation of like being the lawyer in the room. You always have to scream about risk. So, we talked about copyright, how bad information can get fed into large language models. We've talked about this probabilistic element, which means that like it's not always going to be right. You have to understand the data model that it's based on to judge, how appropriate the response and AI gives you is. But in international negotiation, if you're using AI as a tool and that AI makes a mistake that you're not aware of, and that mistake maybe transpires over the course of a live negotiation, who's responsible? Is it the person? Is it the developers? Is it the country that made the statement? How do we mitigate that risk a little bit?
$1 million question, huh? Okay. I'm going to try to keep it short and sweet. If it's a technical mistake, then the developers. In all other cases, then either the person who was using it and didn't triple check, or the organization that allowed the person to use it, and then the person didn't triple check because, well, so that would be the short answer. So I spoke about the Air Canada case, right? In that case, there was a court decision saying that Air Canada has to pay. I can tell you with 100% certainty that they did not build that model from scratch themselves and maybe even built it at all themselves, maybe at best customized a few things and then integrated it on their website. But it was on their website, had their logo, had their name, and promised things. And as Claude said, it's a probabilistic model. And if the model was working as it was supposed to work, giving out the most probable results, then it's not the developer's fault. Then it's the person who was using it, or it's their problem and their fault and their liability at the end of the day. When it comes to copyright infringements, there the problem is slightly more tricky because copyright infringements happen because of the training data that was used initially by the developer. Now, if the developer didn't have the proper license to use it, then it might be their problem, but there are a whole bunch of clauses that get inserted into various contracts for when they are not really liable, even though they should be liable purely legally looking at the situation. But that's why that is a particularly complicated example. And it's also not a very black and white example because copyright and copyright infringements, that's a science, that's a legal discipline in and of itself. So that bit is slightly more different. But when it comes to mistakes and who is liable for the mistakes, again, if the model was working the way it was supposed to work by giving out the most probable result and you over relied on that result, then it's your problem.
Yeah, I think fair enough, but still having enough knowledge, about the technology itself to be aware, aware enough not to make those types of mistakes, at least I feel like is our own personal responsibility, in our professional lives, but also the responsibility of the organizations that we work with and work for. So there's a lot of nuance in negotiation, right? There's political nuance, there's legal nuance, like you said, Taya, all around copyright. Let's not even get into it, but a lot of nuance. Multi-party negotiation, especially when it's international, has even more nuance because each country has its own laws, its own religion, its own culture. And then the biggest part of the nuance in negotiation is human, right? So I was thinking, Claude, sorry to call you out, but I was thinking about something that you said, when we were discussing this session last week. And I actually wrote it down in my notebook, and I'm interested to hear everybody's take on this. And Claude, what you said, you use really nice language. So the more we integrate the use of AI into international negotiations, the more we risk disintegrating the human element that is required for negotiations to succeed. That's not verbatim, but I thought that language was really fantastic. So how do we make sure that we don't lose that sort of fundamental human element in negotiation while still augmenting sort of like the quality or the process of negotiations by using AI as a tool. Claude, why don't we start with you, and then, you know, we can have the ladies.
Well, I'll be a bit more dramatic. I think I have no doubts that negotiators with AI will replace negotiators without AI. And I think no one in this room doubts this. And out of the emerging practice, the way we can learn how to use it, it's evident that AI enters now into the negotiation room, into the negotiation preparation and planning, and it will be at the negotiation table. But and it will augment the capacity of country across the world, but hopefully the least developed countries to measure up to more powerful country in leveling the access to knowledge. Now, that run the risk that if negotiators with AI opt only for facility to simply have it easy to do what they should have been doing first with their own brain, in terms of building trust and engaging with the counterpart and establishing contact in reading the room and the situation, well, they are bound to disappear as well. Because AI can easily take human capabilities and replace it in a way more effective way that it could be by people who are not developing their own capabilities. And that's where the risk is. It's the same thing with students in university opting to use a GPT to write their paper. Well, they have disappeared as students because they're not learning of this experience. So if they disappear in a classroom, they won't reappear in the marketplace because they have not learned that skill of analytical capabilities and so on. So to make it short, AI is a great lever of capabilities and opportunity to develop your skills and deal with complex adversarial negotiation, as we see now. If you develop your new abilities, the diplomat with AI is not the diplomat without. It's a new diplomat. It's one that is able to use AI properly, understanding the risk of probabilistic models, leveraging it as a collaborative tool, and be able to develop a new perspective on diplomacy with AI. The big risk is that people from policymaking to negotiation will simply say, oh, that's so easy now. I'll use AI and I'll go have a coffee. Well, when you come back from your coffee, probably your job is no longer there too, you know? So it's a challenge, and this is why I call AI negotiation challenge. It's a challenge that people need to really gear up because their job is at stake.
Thanks, Claude. I mean, I don't think it's alarmist at all. You know, I think we need to sort of nudge everybody kind of like into this digital age. Cecilia, what do you think about, you know, this question of human agency and nuance in negotiation versus the use of AI?
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting topic. Yeah, I mean, there's a few different things that you could sort of bring up with it. So one thing that I would really want to sort of stress, the more I use AI myself in various different reasons, whether it's communications, whether it's as a research support tool, whether it is, you know, to help with, you know, editing videos and, you know, all of these different things, or language translations, etc. The more I kind of come to understand that I don't want to be the person who does everything with AI, and I don't think I can do that well. And it kind of links back to this question that we were talking about with respect to errors. But if we don't use experts, for example, language experts or diplomats, and enhance what they're doing with AI, not everybody can become a diplomat with AI, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And therefore, I don't think that AI is going to replace even jobs and all of that. But what it will do is replace you if you are not getting up to speed with how to use the AI tools so that you can do your job better. And I think this is the one space in terms of international relations where essentially we are trying to collectively, you know, develop solutions to some of today's most pressing global challenges. That it's the one sort of space where we can say we can use AI to do more and to do better. You know, if you're working for a company or if you're working just as an individual for another organization, etc., just being able to do more isn't always better. Email, for example, didn't lessen our load. It's just created a whole lot more work for us. And, you know, the more that we have to fit in our day. Is that necessarily a good thing? Probably not. But with respect to trying to solve global challenges, this is an area where if we can actually upskill all of the experts in their existing positions, whether it's language experts, diplomats, researchers, to be able to do more and better using AI as a tool, we need the expertise still there in order to make sure that those errors don't occur, to make sure that we are getting better and not just replacing ourselves with, at best, where we are today, rather than sort of evolving and doing more. Thanks.
No, thanks for that. And Taya, what do you think in terms of this human element within the negotiation space and, the whole constellation of AI tools that could be used in that space?
Well, do I think that AI understands nuance in general and political nuance even worse? No. Do I think that an average human understands it? Also no. So that's when using AI as a tool really should be emphasized. What do I mean by that? Well, AI tends to keep its head cool because it doesn't have a head. So when you are, when you have a very strong opinion on something, when you are really annoyed by a person sitting in front of you, then you can use AI to brainstorm, to settle down, especially if it's written negotiations, to tone down your language, to ask AI what it thinks about your arguments. You can even ask it to assess your tone. I'm not saying that it will actually, give you a scientifically correct answer, but it will give you a second to sit down and think about what you are doing before you actually do it. And I think in that sense, it's not even important if it understands political nuance. If it gives you a bit of time and a bit of distance from the problem, then it's definitely a great tool for enhancing your own understanding of political nuance, which is subpar, as I have said, because political nuance is called political nuance for a reason, and that's because it's complicated. It involves persons, it involves states, and it involves emotions, and it involves all sorts of things that you can never fully grasp. But I think AI can be really valuable in grasping them better than what we did previously.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting take of sort of like tempering our hot-headedness, for lack of a better term. Because, one of the disruptions, whether it's a negotiation or just like an everyday interaction, of course, we can get sort of like wrapped up in our emotions, and need to take a step back. But also the person that we're talking to, if there is a history there, or if there is baggage, as some people like to call it, especially in a negotiation, you may need to create that degree of separation, and AI could be useful for that. That way you're sort of like able to take a step back from the knee-jerk reaction that you might have to that person, or to that topic that you might be discussing. So yeah, that's very interesting. I think we could have a whole webinar around this question of like, well, human beings are biased and how we build the models, and whether AI could be more fair than we are, despite not really truly imagining things, or thinking creatively or emotionally about anything. So open questions. I think actually a lot of these questions we're going to be answering in the last webinar when we're talking more about like the augmentation of us as humans using these tools that, let's remember, we build. AI is one of these tools that we build. And doing that in a way that doesn't erase us, that really just helps us in our jobs, but also helps us help others and introduce others to access these types of technologies. So we've fielded most of the audience questions already in the chat, so I think we can probably close out this webinar. So thanks to all of you guys for joining us. Thanks to the audience, of course. As usual, we had majority stay by after the hour to listen to everything that our wonderful speakers had to say. So another big thank you to our audience, and we will see you next time. Next webinar is on June 10th, AI in Humanitarian Action. So that should be a super interesting one. Thanks to everybody, and have a great rest of the day.